Hello there. Waiting for our special guest to join. Welcome into the space. So glad to have y'all here with us. Hello. Accepting the request.
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Can you hear
Once
me all
again,
right?
for whatever reason, my headset isn't working. Can you hear me
I
though?
can.
Okay, great. And I can actually see you this time, which is an improvement on our previous situation. So,
Here, I'm glad
um,
I made it. How's your day been?
oh, it doesn't slow down. But it's all right. So far, so good.
Never ending, never ending. Well, we have some folks who are joining us live, some folks who will catch us a little bit later, but do want to honor your time. Thank you so much for being here. For those who are here with us, my name is Venneikia Williams. I am the campaign manager here at Media 2070, and I have with me here Damaso Reyes. And I'd like to give you the opportunity, however you'd like to introduce yourself, the fun "Who are you?" question, however you'd like to go at that.
Sure. So my name is Damaso Reyes. I'm the executive and investigative editor at the New York Amsterdam News, which is one of America's oldest Black newspapers.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit more about New York Amsterdam News? We'll get into what y'all are coming up and doing later, but just for folks who might not be as familiar.
Sure, absolutely. So the Amsterdam News was founded in 1909 in New York City. And like a lot of other Black newspapers were founded because our community wasn't being well served by the mainstream media, by the mainstream media of the day back in the turn of the 20th century. So our publisher, like many others around the country, started a newspaper to serve the needs of the Black community and in New York. And we've been going since then doing exactly that. Reporting on the civil rights era, reporting, for the past 115 years, really taking as our focus Black and brown communities, not just in New York, but around the country.
Thank you so much for that. We're witnessing living history, and thank you so much for your contribution to the Black press. We're here today to honor the birth of the Black press, which actually March 16th, 1827. So that marks 198 years, almost 200 years of the Black press. And when Freedom's Journal was founded, the opening edition talked about wishing to plead our own cause. And I'm curious for you what that looks like today. What does pleading our own cause look like, especially in a political climate like this?
Well, we quoted those very words when we founded our Blacklight investigative unit, the first of its kind at a legacy Black newspaper. But I think the idea that they expressed almost 200 years ago is still incredibly important today. That is, we should be able to speak for ourselves. And it's interesting because that was a theme throughout pre-Civil War America. You had a lot of white abolitionists making the case for Black freedom and Black liberty. And at a certain point, Black folks began to say, listen, it's great to have allies, but we need, in our own words, to be able to make the case for ourselves. So, Frederick Douglass said words to that effect. Lots of folks in the Black community said words to those effects, because it's one thing to have someone advocate for you. That's wonderful. That's great. But they can't know what you're experiencing, right? They can be allies. They can be sympathizers. They can be activists. But it's different when you have the opportunity to speak for yourself and to speak for your community. I think one of the things that we've seen throughout the history of news media is that coverage of a community from the outside by others looks very different from coverage by that community or by journalists from that community. So, if you dig back in our archives to any, momentous event in American or in New York history, you can see, if you look at the New York Times archive versus our archive, you'll see differences, especially in important issues focusing on the Black community. One of the things I did a while back before I went to go speak to a university class is actually look up our coverage of the case of the Central Park Five versus the New York Times's coverage, and very different, right? We're very well connected to the community as well as to the family. We're presenting the same or similar facts, but in a very different light. And as we know now, those young men were innocent. They were exonerated. And so part of the reason why many people think they were convicted was the media coverage and the way the media covered the case of the Central Park jogger, and later the trial of these young men who claimed to be innocent, claimed that they had confessions coerced. And those claims were not necessarily seen as sympathetic by a lot of the media at the time. So it's important to have your community, whatever that community may be able to speak for itself rather than only being seen through the lens of people from outside the community, which is why news organizations like the Amsterdam News and other members of the Black press are so important even to this day.
No, thank you so much for lifting that up. I'm curious, when we talk about hopes and visions for the future, we can talk more about the importance of the Black press. You talked about like self-advocation and things of that, self-advocacy, things of that nature. But what are your hopes for the Black press in this moment and beyond?
I hope that we can continue to grow and remain relevant. What I really hope is that young people begin to come back to the Black press. I think, there's this myth of a post-racial America that, has gotten spread around that I think a lot of people maybe are waking up from over the past year or so. But the reality is that if you're a young person of color and you want to know what's happening in your community, or you want to know how policy is going to impact your community, the Black press is a great place to go. I also want and hope that folks of all ages begin to really understand and appreciate in this very complex, very noisy media landscape how important news organizations are, but how important the Black press is in particular, right? Because we are telling a different story. We're telling from a different perspective. And if I'm on social media a lot. I've got lots of friends, and one of the things I'll see, once a week, if not once a day, is, well, the media isn't covering it, or the media is biased, or the media is corrupt. Well, I'm part of the media, right? I don't think of myself as being corrupt, but part of that frustration, which I think is a very real frustration, comes from the fact that people aren't consuming news-based information, right? They're on social media, they're consuming a lot of information. But when they get frustrated because they know something's happening in their community, but it's not being covered by, the big media outlets, or they're not seeing it on social media, well, you should follow us, right? You should follow your local ethnic media organization, your local Black newspaper. Maybe you should even subscribe. That way you can get a type of coverage which maybe resembles your reality a little bit more. So remembering and connecting to, I think, our community, especially the young people in our community, is a big part of what we in the Black press need to do. But also, I think, folks, and especially young folks, need, and this is not just this generation, this is every generation has to go through a process of educating itself on what came before, right? When you're young, I know this was the case when I was young, history can seem abstract. Oh, that happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. It doesn't apply to me. Well, what happened in history shapes the reality that we exist in now. And if you don't understand your history, you're kind of doomed to repeat it, right? So a lot of, we're having fights about, who should be considered citizens. We're having fights about women being able to control their bodies. We're having fights over trans people being recognized. These are not new and unique fights in American history. We're having fights over migration and immigration. These are not new fights, right? They feel new to us, especially if some of the younger people maybe haven't lived through this type of assaults before. But there's a lot we can learn from our history. And newspapers like the Amsterdam News are an important link between our past and our present.
No, thank you for uplifting that. You're so correct in saying this moment isn't new, but for folks who are feeling a sense of urgency, a sense of even despair in this moment, what are some words of encouragement or even empowerment that you have as it pertains to our media intake, what we then do past just taking in information to utilizing information? What would you say to these people?
Yeah, I think, looking at what's happening, it's very easy to feel despair. And a lot of the people enacting these policies, I suspect, or advocating for these policies, might want you to feel helpless. They might want you to feel despair. They might want you to feel disconnected. I think one of the great things about the Black press is that we are a form of connection. We are a form of community for our community. So one of the great things about our newspaper is that, we're a general interest newspaper. We cover great things that happen in a community, not just the bad things that happen in our community, right? Not just the shootings, but also the solutions, right? Every week we have a feature called Black New Yorker of the Week. This is someone who's doing something exceptional or uplifting or helping our community, right? So if you want to get away from all the negative stuff, if you don't want to just see negative coverage of our community, then subscribing to, the Afro in DC, the Atlanta Voice, the Houston Chronicle, the Amsterdam News are ways to get a more holistic understanding of what's happening in our community, but also the positive thing, the activists, the people who are fighting back. This is one way, not the only way, obviously, but this is one way in which we can learn about the other people in our community who are facing these same challenges. I think the other thing is that history cuts both ways. We haven't been here before. We've seen these types of assaults before, but one of the great things about, working at a newspaper that's over 100 years old is that we can go back and then look at how our community met those challenges before, how we came together, how we organized. We had a cover story a couple of weeks ago looking at the history of mutual aid societies, right? This idea of community members helping each other, whether it be through food pantries, whether through jobs, education, any number of things, right? Our communities are incredibly resilient, but it's important for us to not believe that we are reinventing the wheel, right? Folks who attack us, they want to attack our history. They want to erase our history, as we're literally seeing. The Department of Defense is erasing, Black and the stories of Black and female veterans from some of their websites, right? If we don't know our history, then it can feel incredibly daunting. And even if you know your history, it probably feels incredibly daunting. But in the same way, we're not alone in terms of being connected to each other and being in a community of strong people. We're not alone in the sense that we have a history as a people as disparate communities of coming together, of working together to fight oppression. And in fact, that's the only way we can effectively fight oppression. So by studying our history, by reading journalism, we can have a better understanding of where we are and how to use the lessons and the tools from history to fight today's battles, even as
So,
we invent new tools.
yes, so good. Thank you so much. It's said in the chat, this is why we need our Black media to preserve our history and to keep the record. Totally agree. So here at Media 2070, last month and now all throughout the year, we've talked about this concept of Black narrative power. We celebrated it during Black History Month, but the intention is almost like McDonald's 365 Black. We're building this power all year long, right? And I'm curious, when you hear Black narrative power, what that sparks for you, and what can it tangibly look like, especially within this current climate?
Yeah, for me, narrative is all about power, right? Ideas are all about power. And so the ability to, sorry, my cat is chiming in here. Chasu, he's got things to say. If we don't control our own narrative, if we don't control the story that's told about us to the rest of the world, then we lose a tremendous amount of power, right? That's one of the reasons why the Black press was created, so we can plead our own cause, so we can tell our stories, not just have other people give their impression or their perspective on our community, which may be negative, which may be inaccurate. So it's easy to demonize a community. It's easy to pass a law that disproportionately, makes people of color suffer or communities of color suffer if the narrative around that community is that they don't deserve constitutional rights, that they don't deserve protection, that they are lazy, that they, aren't real Americans, right? These are all things we've heard in the past. And unfortunately, we're hearing about, immigrant communities and Native communities as well. But all that narrative discourse makes it really easy to otherize someone or someone's plural, right? And so then if we're talking about restricting rights, if we're talking about, restricting aid, if we're talking about restricting resources from a community, well, those people don't deserve it, right? Because everything I've seen, everything I've heard shows that community in a particular light. This is exactly why the Black press was created, right? Is so that we can provide an alternative, not just for us, but also for other people, and ultimately for that historical record, right? Journalists say that, we create the first rough draft of history. Well, if you go back and you want to know what people thought, a lot of people go back and they look at newspaper archives. How did this newspaper cover this event in the community or this historical event? What was their perspective? And then that gets codified, right, into our history books and into the history that we teach our children, so that it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? But this is exactly why, organizations like the Amsterdam News are so incredibly important, is that we provide not just a historical alternative, right, to people who are looking back and trying to set the history of, whatever, the 20th century, urban communities, fill in the blank. But today, right now, we provide every day, every week, we are providing, and our peers in the Black press are providing important alternative perspectives on what's happening and how these things are impacting our community. And if we didn't tell these stories, very few other people would, because the reality of the mainstream press, in quotation marks, is that it does not reflect the wonderful and hard-fought diversity of our country. It is not representative of our nation. It's mostly not representative of the cities in which these news organizations are based. So how could they possibly accurately or fairly convey what's happening in our communities?
So true, so true. And so when it comes to us then wielding this narrative power, other than subscribing to sources and outlets like New York Amsterdam News, what are a couple of things that you would say to the layperson? Maybe it's a journalist, maybe it's just the person on the stoop who's giving broadcasts on what's happening on the block, right? But what would you say from that perspective?
So, obviously follow, Black journalists, follow Black news organizations on social media, share what you see on their social media posts, subscribe, like, do all those wonderful things. I think when you see things that purport to be news or social media posts that, conflict with your understanding of reality, with your lived experience, it's important to call that out, right? It's important to call out mis and disinformation when you see it, especially when it's harmful to our communities. But I think it's just being engaged in general, no matter whether that's subscribing or supporting a news organization, whether that's, being a volunteer. I think right now it's all about being engaged. And I think that when you engage, first you connect with other people, right? Second, I think you realize your own power and the collective power that we have as a community. And so right now it can feel really safe to just sort of retreat into your bubble, into your safe space. And sometimes we need to do that. But we also need to realize that, we do need to plead our own case, right? Change is not going to happen because somebody else thinks it's a good idea and really wants to help us out, right? We have to demand that change. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a fight, without a demand, right? So we have to demand for what we want. We have to advocate for what we want. And we have to engage with our community, right? We have to stop being isolated and find ways to engage with each other and to connect with each other so we can really begin to both appreciate and utilize our collective power.
Yes, thank you. Key word, key takeaway, engage. That's so crucial. We have a question in the chat that leads me back to New York Amsterdam News in general. Just curious what you all are up to these days, any fun things that the folks should be keeping an eye and ear out for. But the question in the chat was, I'm interested in knowing some of your favorite things that you found going through the archives of New York Amsterdam News.
That would be its own separate Instagram live post, but there's a lot. And so we worked with Media 2070. We collaborated on a project called Black Future Newsroom. And so we produced a special edition of the Amsterdam News with pieces written from the perspective of someone writing in the year 2070. And we also published stories from as far back as the 19 teens on the same topic. So if you go to amsterdamnews.com/future, I believe, you can see those stories. There you go. The wonderful print edition. And for me, what was interesting working on that project was, we sort of picked these themes, something like reparations, right? And so then I went back through the archives to find how long we had been talking about reparations, and we had been talking about reparations since the 1920s or 30s in our newspaper and throughout, up until, this very day. So I think one of the things, rather than just talking about individual stories, although there are millions of, thousands of those, for me, what's really interesting is this idea of, we're living through something new, but it's deeply connected to the past, like the issues of reparations, the issues of stewardship for the environment, the issues of women's equality and equality of queer people. These are all things that we've talked about for 50, 60, 70 years in our newspaper. So it was really interesting to go back whenever I have a chance to go back through the archives and see the connection between the past and the present. It gives me a lot of hope.
Yes, for sure. One of my favorites going back through that print edition was the love article that we found and talk.
Yeah.
I always love uplifting such things because, like you said, it's not just the gloom and doom, but stories of hope and possibility that you all uplift from the poetry and artwork to spotlighting people within the community. So, thank you so much for that work. Is there anything that we can be on the lookout for? Anything that we can be uplifting and amplifying in the coming months or years?
Yeah, I'm really proud of the work that our investigative unit has done. So you could go to amsterdamnews.com/blacklight and view some of that work and share it with the community. Talking about pleading your case, having the ability to do investigative work, to expose wrongdoing, but also to talk about solutions and solutions to the challenges that our community face. One of the projects we've been working on is one called Beyond the Barrel of the Gun, which is moving beyond the usual gun violence coverage and trying to explore the root causes of, impact on, and solutions to gun violence in Black and Brown communities. And we've done some great work, and we're going to be, publishing some really important stories around this issue over the next couple weeks. So definitely follow us on IG, NY Am News, and you'll see those posts and see some videos and things like that. So and just be in touch with us. Send us messages. Let us know what you want us to cover. What are the things that are important to you? This is an important way that we understand what's happening in our community and have the opportunity to respond to it.
For sure. Again, keyword engage. Um, Final question to you in this moment is the year is 2070. And uh, I'm curious what you think a world in which media reparations are won looks like, where we have freedom of expression, where we have actual freedom of press, all of those things. What does that world look like for you? Paint a picture for us.
I hope and believe that we will be further along the path towards justice. I think that injustice happens when ignorance prevails. And I think that having the ability to tell our own stories, having the resources to tell our own stories, which is incredibly important, will allow for us to move towards that, further towards that arc of justice, right? I think we're still going to be struggling in a lot of ways. I hope and believe that we will be further down the road towards a society that treats all of its people equally, but that also redresses the injustices of history that continue to have ripple effects to the present day. So media reparations, but reparations in general, are going to be an important, not just step, but an important barometer of how seriously our community and our nation and our society takes this idea of justice, because you can't have justice without addressing the wrongs of the past. It's impossible, because those wrongs continue to have ripple effects, continue to have impact. So if we get to a place where we begin to have or implement media reparations and reparations writ large, I think that will be a symptom of a healthier and more just and more loving society, where people can more easily embody their hopes and their dreams, which is, ultimately what a healthy society should be doing for us.
Agreed, agreed. Well, is there anything else that you'd love to share with the folks here watching now and those who will watch later?
Yeah. You know, it's important to not think of media as one big thing. The media is like society. It's got a lot of people in it. And the Black media has been here before you were born and will hopefully be here after we're all gone. But that second part, only happen if we support the things that we care about. And that's true in life in general, right? But that's certainly true of media outlets. If you think there are media outlets out there doing a good job representing your community, support them, let them know, share their stories, but also become a subscriber or become a supporter. The existence of the Black press wasn't a foregone conclusion 198 years ago. Its persistence wasn't a foregone conclusion over the past almost 200 years. And its existence, 20 years from now, let alone 200 years from now, is not a given. These are choices that we make, right? What do we give our attention to? Do we give our attention to the people who are trying to oppress and tell terrible stories about us? Or do we give our attention and share the stories of uplift that folks from within our community are creating? These choices that we make here and now are going to be what our descendants look at, and they will be impacted by the decisions we make today. So every time that you feel helpless, remember you're part of a really powerful continuum of people who have worked really hard and fought really hard, and now it's our turn to continue that fight and to continue that struggle to make a better world, not just for us, but for those who will come after us.
Thank you. Someone said in the chat, this is a critical call to action. And I appreciate your charge to engage, to make better decisions, to support and sustain our institutions, the life-giving ones, the ones that make the world a better place. So I thank you for your time. Always a great time talking to you. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. And until next time, I'll say goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.